wait, Verstine, can I just ask you just quickly before you go into depth on that? Does it have to do with the mercury in the vaccines or not necessarily? I'm just asking as a layman.
I think it's a lot of factors in the vaccines, not just the mercury.
Okay.
And the aerosol, yeah, it's a lot of factors. Like I said, there's been no long-term study of all of the synergistic components of these vaccines, so you can't say that they're not safe.
Yeah,
or they are safe. You know,
Halsey, Dustin, and I are relatively the same age. I think we can remember when autism was that kid, emotionless kid, rocking back and forth in the middle of the living room floor, who if you touched him, he screamed bloody murder. Now they say autism is, well, your kid was having a bad day for 3 days. You know,
well, I mean, it depends.
I was screaming Bloody Mary.
I actually used to work with autistic kids, and it's on a spectrum. So it just.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. Now it's on the spectrum, like Bill Nye's gender. Everything is becoming on a spectrum now. So I mean, okay. I'm saying just for me, I'm a little suspect about what we call autism and what could be something else that they're lumping in under that umbrella.
Okay, that's a good. Just say it's brain damage. You have brain damage. So whether you're high functioning, you people that, maybe like somebody like Rain Man, right? Where they're good at memorizing things but they have really poor social skills, or you're like some other people I know on the lower end of the spectrum where they have they rub shit on their face and they bang their head up against the wall. It's just varying degrees of brain damage. So, so you asked about the mercury and stuff. There is well, first of all, let me talk about adjuvants. You guys know what adjuvants are?
I do.
Okay. Do you guys know what adjuvants are? Adjuvants. Okay.
Adjuvants is the introduction of aluminum into a vaccine, which makes it more effective.
How does it make it more effective?
Huh?
How does it make it more effective?
By inducing a stronger immune response to the virus that was injected.
And what does it do to the body?
Aluminum? Hardly anything.
No, what does it do to the body when it's injected into you?
Nothing.
Okay, so when aluminum is used as an adjuvant to stimulate, to make the antigen, whatever the viruses work better. So it basically creates an inflammatory response in your body. Mm-hmm. So indiscriminately. So
can I ask a question real quick? Just a real quick question.
Yeah.
How come adjuvants are bad in your estimation for vaccines when they're like the most common thing to use with cancer treatments?
Well, who said cancer treatments are good?
Well, I mean, the success rate with treating cancer compared to not treating cancer is just monumentally different.
Okay, well, that's another show. We'll have to agree. We have to agree to disagree on that. Okay.
So, I mean,
just stick to the adjuvants. I don't think that they're good in any case. I'll put it that way. So I'm saying, with the adjuvants, right? They stimulate the immune system. They have to keep the body in a constant state of inflammation in order to keep the titers, stimulate the titers and make them reproduce fast. So when people become autistic, usually what happens is they get the vaccine, their brain will swell up and, encephalitis, and then they'll get brain damage as a result. Other autoimmune disorders that are linked to vaccines, asthma, inflammation of the bronchial tubes, arthritis, inflammation of the joints, Kawasaki's disease, inflammation of the lining of the blood wall, the blood vessels. All these autoimmune diseases usually have to do with some form of inflammation in the body. So when you're injecting adjuvants into someone, you're creating and putting their body in a constant state of
there might be something to that, but there's also been a whole lot of research in the past 5 or 10 years about this, people's fad diets now, then they're switching to, just all meat diets and getting off of carbohydrates and sugar is really, really reducing inflammation. So if you wanted to study this and its relation to vaccines, you would also have to control for people who have way too much sugar in their diet that's causing more inflammation.
Yeah, that's really not debatable in the sense, because I'm just explaining the theory of how one of the components of why people use adjuvants.
Well, if you're on this channel, everything's debatable.
I'm just saying, it's, you know what I'm saying? So just by that factor alone, I can see why vaccines could cause autism, because you're injecting something under the skin. Like I said earlier, when you get a disease or you get something through your orifices, you're able to pass it. Even if you like swallow aluminum or swallow, like, I wouldn't swallow mercury, but if you're swallowing those things, you can pass it out a lot of times through your stool or through your urine. But if you're injecting something into your body, it accumulates. And what they're finding too is, like, the macrophages are actually, they go around and gobble up like the disease cells and stuff. And
well, some people in the chat they love to hear you say orifices and swallow. So they want.
So it's carrying it up to the brain, right? It's carrying it up to the brain, and once it's in there, you can't pass it. It's not passing it.
Do you happen to know in any of your research or notes that you have handy the propensity and rates at which the general population is diagnosed with autism versus the kids who are immune when they're diagnosed with autism? I mean, do you know which one has a greater proportion? I mean, I don't know. I'm not trying to set a trap here. I came on to answer evolution questions. This is, you and Halsey stuff. I mean, I'm just curious, and I'll tell you why I'm curious. It's because there might be a completely different link to autism that we're overlooking, like we do with everything, and that is a genetic propensity for autism.
Well, I think that vaccines aren't the only thing that can cause autism, definitely.
So what do you think? The vaccine acts more like a catalyst for a predisposition?
I think it can directly cause autism. I mean, I had a friend whose child became autistic after he had brain damage after the anesthesia actually damaged his brain, and now he's autistic. So I think that there could be different causative factors. I definitely think vaccines are the main one, and this is why we need to have a vax versus unvaccinated study. To see, on a large scale, to see if, to really get an accurate representation of that. I believe from my experience.
Is it only particular vaccines that can cause autism, or is it all of them?
No, well, all of them. So DPT vaccine before there's a really good documentary news report. It's old. It's like in the 70s. Like late 70s, earlier, before the 1986, before the compensation injury program was reinstated, there was lots of lawsuits against the pharmaceutical industries for the DPT vaccine mainly, and I don't even think the MMR vaccine was out yet. So this is basically, by that time they had like polio vaccine, DPT vaccine, maybe smallpox, which they stopped vaccinating for. But that time, people were getting brain damaged from the vaccine.
Definitely a little confused here insofar as the statement that all vaccines can or do cause autism. I don't want to straw man you here. There's so much, chemical and compound and just so much difference between these wide range of vaccines. I would have to ask, if all vaccines can cause autism, then what doesn't cause autism? If you give your kids Theraflu off the shelf, or NyQuil, or put them in front of a humidifier, it seems to me that this is the kind of scenario you're painting. We're just doomed to catch autism.
Well, no, it just depends on whether their blood-brain barrier is compromised by the chemicals that are put into their bodies that they can't pass. So there's another lady who's she's a cellular molecular biologist who's from Stanford, and she's a co-discoverer of heart stem cells, and she's actually focused on the human DNA, because they use aborted fetal cells to grow some of the antigens in the vaccines, and she discovered that they're actually integrating into our DNA.
The viruses used in vaccines are produced in cell lines because production in a test tube is inefficient and too costly. Currently, both animal and human fetal cell lines are used by vaccine manufacturers. Production of viruses in cell lines results in residual DNA and cellular debris from the manufacturing cell line in the final product. For instance, as can be found in Merck's summary basis for approval, which is Appendix F, page 3, for the chickenpox vaccine, over 2 micrograms of residual double-stranded human fetal DNA are present in each vaccine, which is approximately twice the amount of the active ingredient of the vaccine, which is the varicella virus, a DNA virus. As FDA scientists state in their 2008 publication in the journal Biologicals, the danger of residual DNA in vaccines has been debated for over 50 years without appropriate studies. The 2008 publication by these FDA scientists demonstrates the real and present danger of human DNA residuals in vaccines, which include cancer, autoimmunity, and genomic disruption. As I have already mentioned, the IACC strategic plan well summarizes data demonstrating de novo genomic disruptions at varied sites in at least 10% of children diagnosed with ASD. Having worked in commercial biotechnology and clinical development programs, I was aware of the residuals that would be found in vaccines, and having also worked with homologous recombination and molecular biology, I was also aware that the human fetal DNA introduced in vaccines has the potential to elicit autoimmune responses or to incorporate into the recipient's own genes and disrupt normal protein production. Inflection points, change points, are clear by eye in U.S. autism prevalence data from the Department of Education, as well as from the California Department of Developmental Services. This intriguing and perplexing visual assessment of U.S. autism prevalence, together with publications on autism rates in the UK, led Sound Choice to more fully investigate. What we have found is that across continents and across decades, changes in autism disorder, not considering autism spectrum, but only autism disorder, are clearly associated with the introduction of vaccines produced using human fetal cell lines. Each time we inject our children with one of these vaccines, we are also injecting them with residual fetal human DNA. So not only was human fetal DNA introduced to our children with the MMR2 and chickenpox vaccines, but a retrovirus capable of enhancing genomic insertion was also introduced in these vaccines. Human endogenous retrovirus K is present in the MMR2, in ProVax, which is a monovalent rubella no longer produced, and the chickenpox vaccines. This work was published in the Journal of Virology in 2010. HERV-K, human endogenous retrovirus K, is a virus related to the MMLV virus, a virus that was used to deliver gene therapy in clinical trials for boys with SCID disease, that's severe combined immune deficiency. They're also known as the bubble boys. The MMLV virus caused inappropriate gene insertion and subsequent somatic gene mutations in 4 of 9 boys that led to the development of cancer, although experts testifying prior to the initiation of those clinical trials estimated the risk at 10 to the minus 26. The actual risk turned out to be 4 of 9 boys developed cancer. These studies are published and are included in the appendix of the binders that I have with me. I also need to say that it is important that independent groups conduct these types of analysis, and several groups should independently examine each question so that children are finally helped and protected. One of the key scientists funded by the CDC to do studies into MMR and autism links, studies used to dismiss the MMR autism hypothesis, was indicted on April 13th this year, 2011, on 13 counts of fraud and 9 counts of money laundering. Furthermore, Dr. Thorson had already been cited for academic misconduct by his own university and was charged with embezzling $1 million grant from the Centers for Disease Control.
and could be causes for.
Yeah,
I just want to ask this question that came in from one of our lead writers, Alex Roberts, who has Asperger's. He's a writer on HalseyNews.com, and he wanted me to ask
that
you.
explains a lot.
Versine, if he wanted to know if you know or have seen any studies on vaccine effects, where on the autism spectrum one falls, since Asperger's is part of that spectrum. He wanted to know if you've seen anything,
Any studies?
Yes, or any information, because he said, he's Asperger's. He was vaccinated as a kid, but to go to elementary school and that kind of stuff. And he said he wanted to know, since he's part of a larger Asperger's community of kids, could it cause Asperger's, or is there only certain parts of autism on the spectrum?
I don't really know. Like I said, we have to have those vax and unvax studies. So, I mean, I don't know. I'd have to know his individual case. Like I said, it could be vaccines. It could be anesthesia. It could be, I think from my experience, from what I've witnessed, from people I've talked to, like I saw my best friend's son become talk before and then got brain damage and not talking again after the vaccine. And the same thing happened to my cousin. There was just a case, if you've heard about the Vax movie, they're actually doing a kind of a testimonial anecdotal study where they're going around the country and logging people's story. There was one incident that they just recorded where there were triplets that actually got a vaccine and they all became autistic after they were vaccinated.
That definitely goes more to a genetic argument.
No, actually, they said when they
if they're triplets.
No, but then they actually consulted for genetics, and then
if you can tell us who you are.
Brenda and David McDowell. Hi, how you doing? We have triplets. We have
look at that.
Triplets that are now 10.
They're 10 years old.
They're 10 now. That's before the injury.
2 boys and a girl?
2 boys and a girl.
And their names? I've written their names on the bus, so I do know.
Richie, Robbie, and Claire, just as they are in that picture.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. Okay. All right, so let's talk about what happened.
Well, every day in our life was a party. Every single day they were holding hands and smiling and laughing and looking at each other, engaging in each other. And we brought them in at 9 months and 4 days we were doing one vaccine at a time. They were born 36 weeks, triplets, basically 5 pounds each. Yeah, we did well. They were well. Everything was well. They came home after a few days of being monitored in the NICU. And on June 25th, 2007, we brought them in for the pneumococcal shot.
So just that shot?
One shot. And I went in, not with my husband, he was working. I went in with my nanny, and we went in at 10 a.m.
These are all 3?
All 3, yeah. And it was the last one on the page is the June 25th, 2007 was the shot that did it. And we went in at 10 a.m. for the shot. My daughter still has the mark on her leg from the shot. She was the first one to get it, and she screamed and never really stopped screaming after that. But we continued. We didn't know. We did the boys as well. By noon, Claire shut completely off. Claire, our daughter, shut off first. It was as if she was blind and deaf and complete failure to thrive, from super, super happy, smiley girl to, this is a picture of her. She had full-blown eye contact. She was super lovely. And she shut right down. And all she did at that moment was stare at the ceiling fan. So that was at noon. We had the shot at 10 a.m. 2 o'clock, we watched Richie shut off. All his raspberry blowing and mama dada and the furniture walking and everything, they just shut off. All the giggles, all the smiles, again, failure to thrive. They lost all their reflexes. I'm an educational audiologist. I actually did the test for the stapedial reflex, which is a little muscle in the middle ear, just to see if a muscle they can't control was still working, and it didn't. The stapedial reflex dampens sound, so your ears don't hurt from a really loud sound, and both of them had no stapedial reflex. They stopped blinking, stopped yawning, stopped coughing, stopped sneezing. You could go towards their eyes and they wouldn't even phase, nothing would phase them. They lost their startle reflex. I threw a telephone book on the floor behind them, and no startle, nobody even looked to see what it was. So that was 2 o'clock. We watched Richie shut down, and I couldn't breathe. But here we go. The worst is when we saw the final one shut down. Sorry. Here's Robbie. When we lost Robbie, Robbie looked like he was hit by a bus. Robbie, from that moment on, had a stunned look on his face. If you asked or said his name, he still acted deaf and acted like he couldn't hear, although they did have normal hearing. I had it all tested. But he lost his happiness. This is a first year picture? First birthday.
3 months after the shot.
3 months after the shot. They were no longer engaged in anything or anyone. They lost their smiles. They just were in their own little separate worlds. They never held hands again. They never looked at each other again. Sorry. Vaccine injury is real. We were told it was genetic. And then we were told by geneticists that there's no possible way 3 children was shut off on the same day. That was absolutely statistically impossible, especially being 2 boys and 1 girl.